My name is Emily Parker. I'm 28, born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, and currently living in Chicago, Illinois, where I work as a junior consultant at a mid-sized management consulting firm. Growing up, my mom worked hard as a high school English teacher, and my dad was a dedicated auto mechanic at a local garage. They both believed in dignity through honest work and instilled in me a quiet determination to succeed. I learned early that words matter, and telling stories, whether in writing or in conversation, felt like a way to find my own voice. During high school, I contributed to the school magazine, writing short pieces that felt like small victories. I studied administration in college and landed my first consulting role at Harrington and Co. 2 years ago. Despite putting my heart into every analysis and presentation, my career has plateaued, just one modest raise since graduating. I don't complain, I'm proud of my work quality, but it's as though I'm invisible, delivering spotless reports, but never invited to speak up in big meetings or represent clients in Denver or Dallas. I pride myself on my quiet competence, late-night revisions, thorough charts, and flawless decks. My boss, Mark Stevenson, 42, stands at 6'2" with a chilly gaze and a calm, measured tone. In private, he acknowledges my efforts. In public, he barely registers my existence. He praises my work quietly, but when it comes to meetings or speaking roles, he sidelines me in favor of others who speak louder. 2 weeks ago, the firm announced its next all-staff meeting at our Chicago office. About 80 colleagues gathered in the large conference room. These quarterly meetings are where promotions are announced, high-impact client wins are showcased, and strategic directions are unveiled. I spent days preparing a 10-slide deck featuring metrics and cost-saving ideas for one of our top clients. I believed it was strong enough to present to senior leadership, maybe even to a partner in New York. But when I arrived, I realized I hadn't been asked to present. I watched as Carlos Ramos, a chatty intern, barely 2 months in, was tapped to present instead. My fingers trembled slightly. I smiled politely as he strutted up, but my stomach felt hollow. On the morning of the meeting, I arrived early. I wore my favorite blouse, the one that makes me feel confident, paired with gray slacks. I sat in the center row, heart pounding. I convinced myself it didn't matter if I didn't present. This was collaboration, after all. But my unease wouldn't go away. At precisely 9 a.m., the meeting began with the CEO, Margaret Ellis, walking in, heels clacking, followed silently by Mark. The room hushed. After general updates, Margaret called Mark to share a notable client insight. I sensed that might be my cue. It was the exact area I had worked on. Mark opened a slide titled Perspectives on Client X. My pulse spiked. For a moment, I thought he was going to call on me. But then he handed the remote to Carlos, smiled encouragingly, and said, "Carlos will walk us through the highlights." Carlos launched into his bullet points. He spoke confidently, but I recognized phrases I had written, ideas I had drafted months ago. My heart sank. I wanted to stop him, to stand up and say, those were my slides, but words failed me. When Carlos finished, Mark returned to the stage, pen tapping on the podium. He introduced the next agenda item. Then, nodding toward me, he said, "Emily, could you please read your resume so we can remind everyone who you are?" My breath caught in my throat. The projector clicked, and my resume flashed on the screen. Bold headings, bullet points outlining my key projects, my degree from the University of Michigan, and the Excellence in Client Engagement Award I received 2 years ago. He paused, then asked, "Emily, who lists an award from 2019 and doesn't even blog about it? Anyone care to explain?" His tone was light, but the implication was loud. A few chuckles echoed around the room. I felt my face flame red. The room filled with that uncomfortable, collective laughter, light at first, then louder. I couldn't believe this was happening. This was not how I'd imagined or trained for moments like these. The humiliation was swift and public. I looked down at my hands, shaking slightly. My coffee sat forgotten on the table in front of me. My palms were sweaty. The laughter grew louder, and the CEO's eyes flicked to me briefly, an ambiguous expression that I couldn't read. Embarrassment enveloped me like a dense fog. I could feel tears threatening to spill. My throat felt tight, as though the words had been swallowed. I wished I could disappear. The slide on the screen felt like a spotlight aimed at my insecurities and silent years of work. In that moment, I realized that despite all my quiet dedication, I didn't matter, at least not in Mark's world. Finally, the laughter subsided. My cheeks burned, and I avoided everyone's gaze. I cleared my throat and managed to mutter, "That was accurate." I grabbed my resume from the table and sat down, head low. The rest of the meeting continued in a blur. Numbers, charts, predictions, but I felt hollow. When the meeting adjourned, colleagues started chatting casually, unaware of the war raging inside me. I stood up, silently packed my bag, and walked out without a word. The hallway lights felt harsh and fluorescent. Bullshit platitudes like team, trust, and thrive felt farther away than ever. That afternoon, I sat in my apartment overlooking the Chicago River. I replayed the moment in my mind, the hushed chuckles, the sheen of embarrassment on my skin. I realized I had two choices: let it define me or let it drive me. As much as it stung, that moment was a breaking point. If he only saw a joke, I'd become something he couldn't ignore. I sat straight and opened my laptop. I logged into LinkedIn and started rewriting my profile, adding detailed descriptions of the projects I led, the clients I helped, and the value I brought. I searched for every hint of opportunity. I messaged a recruiter at Google I had connected with months ago after a virtual panel. I told her I was exploring new roles and would love to share my experience. That afternoon, I drafted my CV, polished it to a shine. Every bullet concise but powerful. I proofread it twice, then saved it under Emily_Parker_Google_CV_final.pdf. My face was still flushed from the embarrassment, but there was something else beneath it now. Determination. The meeting had broken me, but also ignited something. I would no longer be speaker two, assistant, or background filler. I would speak. I would be heard. And that's how Chapter 1 ends, with Emily transforming pain into potential, stepping out of the shadows, and deciding that public humiliation would not define her. Her own voice would. The morning after the quarterly all-staff meeting, Chicago's air felt different. A crisp tension that matched the knot in my stomach. I woke up early, the weight of what had happened still pressing against my chest. The lights of downtown glowed through my apartment window as I brewed a strong cup of coffee, my hands shaking slightly. Each sip was a reminder of the embarrassment I'd felt, my voice silenced in that conference room, my competence ridiculed, my presence erased. I stared at my reflection in the kitchen window. Behind those green eyes was a girl who loved stories, who once believed charisma was only for extroverts. That version of me felt buried somewhere under 3 years of silent, hidden work. But something else flickered now, an ember of defiance that refused to burn out. The elevator ride to the office was quiet, too quiet. The other tenants in my floor didn't notice me. Maybe they didn't remember me. Maybe they never saw me. It was the same with the subway ride, sea of heads buried in phones, unaware of my internal war. A single moment of public humiliation had made me invisible to everyone who wasn't watching. At Harrington & Co., the coffee corner was a small break area by the kitchenette where people gathered before meetings, during breaks, or to get away from their desks. It was an arbitrary nook in the middle of the bullpen, but it felt like a stage. I could no longer avoid it. I needed a routine to prove to myself that I still deserved being here. So I started visiting that corner every day at precisely 10:15 a.m., ordering the strongest Americano I could tolerate. I sat there with my mug in hand, logging into LinkedIn or reading articles from McKinsey, absorbing the strategies of people who built careers by making noise. The first 2 mornings, no one spoke to me. The barista, Judy, recognized me and said only, "Your usual, Emily?" I nodded, and she flashed me a friendly yet distant smile. I slung my bag over the counter and opened my laptop. Inside, I'd created a spreadsheet tracking job applications, follow-ups, interview prep, and feedback. I colored each row green when something moved forward, red when it stalled. The table became a metric of my own progress, my own momentum. One morning, just as I logged an interview request from Google for the following week, another consultant, Rachel, stopped by. She'd always been chatty, but kept a respectful distance. She asked, "Hey, Em, you okay? You disappeared after yesterday's meeting." I set down my coffee and looked at her, unsure whether to lie or spill everything. "I'm good," I said quietly, "just processing." My voice felt foreign in my own ears. She nodded, eyes gentle. "That was rough. But you know what? You have ideas. I've read them. You make sense." I closed my laptop and swallowed. Hearing someone say what I already knew felt both affirming and tear-inducing. "Thanks, Rachel," I said. "That means a lot." She lingered for a second, then said, "If you ever want to practice your presentation, I'm around." And with a smile, she walked away. For the first time since the meeting, I felt seen. That afternoon, I took my laptop home and rehearsed the pitch I'd prepared months ago. I spoke out loud, standing in front of my apartment's living room mirror at 7 p.m. I timed each bullet point, I marked pauses, and when I stumbled over a phrase, I repeated it until it didn't choke me anymore. My mug of herbal tea sat untouched beside me. This rehearsal was important, sacred even. The next morning, at the coffee corner, I opened an email confirming my first round of interviews with Google. The subject line read, "Interview scheduled, Emily Parker, Product Strategy." My breath caught. I looked over at Judy, who smiled at me when I ordered. At that moment, the corner didn't feel like a stage. It felt like ground I was holding. Over the next few days, my routine solidified. Coffee at 10:15, application logs, strategy articles, interview prep, and more conversation with Rachel. She taught me small presentation tricks: eye contact, breathing, stance. I bought new blazers and practiced walking to the corner in heels as if giving a keynote speech, reminding myself that posture mattered. I was preparing not just for an interview, I was preparing to unlearn the habit of hiding. At work, I continued churning out quality analysis, but I paused on being invisible. I began adding small comments in team docs, one-liners that summarize my unique vantage, questions I'd ask in meetings. I noticed people started to reply. Others opened those comments. My voice, once invisible, was now annotated across shared files. I still didn't speak up in big meetings, but the tentacles of my presence began to spread. When the interview day arrived, Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. New York time, I sat in my tiny home office watching a countdown. I chose a quiet background, a bookshelf, a neutral wall. I wore a crisp white blouse and a dark blazer. My notes were tidy on a second laptop. I looked at my reflection in the laptop camera and gave myself a nod. "You've got this, Emily." I hit join. The Zoom greeted me with a calm voice. "Hi, Emily. This is Diane from Google. How are you today?" 30 minutes later, I met a product manager, then a user experience lead. Each question felt like a dance I was ready for. I spoke of patterns in client work, of untapped opportunities, of the exact slide I'd been sidelined from presenting in Chicago. I referenced metrics confidently and made suggestions about scaling strategies at tech scale. It felt right. I felt seen. Later that day, I walked back to the coffee corner with a self-affirming secret. I'd left my mark on Google. My spreadsheet flagged the row green. I sat there, sipping my coffee, feeling a smile spread across my face. It wasn't revenge, but it was validation. I was no longer just the coffee corner girl. I was competing with confidence. Mark passed by at 10:20 and said quietly, "Morning, Emily." I responded with a crisp, "Morning, Mark." No twisted jokes, no sarcasm, just presence. He nodded and walked on. Nothing spectacular that morning, but inside me, a shift had happened. The silent strategy of resilience and preparation was paying off. My humiliation had birthed my strategy, and for the first time, I saw the first strokes of my own redemption painting over that moment of shame. The second week after the all staff meeting marked a subtle shift, both in Emily's heart and in her routine. Mornings no longer centered around dread, they revolved around deliberate choice. On Monday, she woke at 6 a.m. in her Lakeview apartment and took a brisk walk along the Chicago Riverwalk, the early summer breeze cool against her cheeks. The water's surface reflected skyscrapers awakening, mirroring Emily's own resolve to rise. She didn't stop by the coffee corner that morning. Instead, she entered the office 10 minutes early and made her way to the collaboration hub, a small pod room with glass walls just off the bullpen. She reserved it for 20-minute deep focus sessions, a place to draft strategy and apply frameworks she'd been studying. Notes covered her laptop screen: value proposition, pain points, client personas, scale potential, metrics. Her fingers flew as she created diagrams, sketched new slide concepts, and rehearsed transitions between ideas. It was time to evolve her preparation from abstract ambition into tangible frameworks. At 8:45, she received a chat ping from Carlos. "Hey Em, can you review my slides for the Anderson project? Thanks." Beneath the awkward tone, she sensed genuine respect. She clicked the link, opened his deck, and left track changes, tightened text, clarified outcome measures, refined a metric slide. At noon, he sent emojis and a quick thank you. Emily realized that helping others, quietly and purposefully, anchored her into the team culture she'd once felt excluded from. Small ripples, but ripples nonetheless. Later that afternoon, in a one-on-one with Mark, he began with the usual: "How are things on the X account?" She responded with details: progress, challenges, next steps, all delivered confidently. He nodded, impressed. She then pivoted. "I've been developing a slide deck to improve our revision cycles on Y project. Could I walk you through the draft?" His eyebrows lifted. She opened her screen, walked him through problem statement, root causes, proposed solutions. Mark frowned, not in disapproval, but in attention. He asked question after question: cultivation of detail, growth levers, resource needs. Their conversation stretched 15 minutes. At the end, he said, "Let's schedule this for the leadership team next week." She felt a grin bloom inside. That evening, Emily walked to a small cafe off Belmont Avenue to journal. She ordered a latte and pulled out a yellow legal pad. Her pen scratched a growth plan. Step 1, complete Google interview round by Friday. Step 2, draft internal presentation for leadership. Step 3, volunteer to lead roadshow pitch for Denver office next quarter. Step 4, record monthly progress reports under my name. When she saw notifications that one of her LinkedIn posts, a short article around client data use cases, had 150 views and 2 comments by senior consultants, she paused and smiled. Someone had replied, "Nice insight on how to measure ROI across verticals." It felt like reclamation of voice. Midweek, Mark asked Emily to prep slides for an urgent board update. She spent nights synthesizing data into narrative form: problem, insight, resolution. When she uploaded the deck Wednesday afternoon into the shared folder, she added a note: "Key recommendation highlighted in slides 4 to 6. Nobody deletes notes this precise." In group chat, her message received 3 thumbs up. A campaign, a shift, she was now subtly steering. Friday came. She logged onto Zoom with Google recruiters. Second round interview, a case-style challenge. They presented a client scenario, a product struggling to retain users. The clock started ticking. Emily opened her deck, leaned forward, and began with, "We need to understand deeper user behavior." She built the framework, allocated resources, provided test steps. She used examples from her firm's own projects. The interviewers responded with nods, smiles, follow-ups. At the end, they said, "Fantastic structured answer and real-world insight. Thank you." She exhaled in relief. A green row in her spreadsheet glowed. On returning to the office Monday, she passed the collaboration hub and saw Karen, a senior consultant, opening a door. Karen looked up, saw Emily, and asked, "Got time for 5 minutes?" They sat down and Emily offered career advice, slide tips, and empathy. Karen said, "You're really good at this, Em. You should present at our client offsite soon." Emily smiled. At 5:30 p.m., Emily booked a brief meeting in Mark's calendar. When he arrived, he found her seated behind the small conference table. She began, "I wanted to ask for 10 minutes to share draft for tomorrow's client offsite, reinforcing velocity tracking insights." He nodded, curious. She presented slide deck, explaining flow, value to client, graphical clarity. He listened, paused, and said, "This is strong, Emily. Let's run it tomorrow at the Denver pitch." She left the room filled with buzzing assurance. That evening, Emily sat in her apartment again and updated her yellow pad. Sunday plan, refine offsite process, refine Denver pitch, maintain focus on Google process. She felt the current of strategic ascent under her skin, a silent, relentless river. She even began waking at 5:30 a.m. to work her case studies, reading Amazon's leadership principles. She added them to her elevator pitch and her now iconic coffee corner PowerPoint drafts. Every slide, every note, every meeting tracked progress. 2 weeks passed. She noticed subtle shifts. Carlos pinged for Fox help. Karen suggested her name in private chat as someone to take bigger roles. Mark started CCing her on leadership emails. Her LinkedIn reach reached 500 views on one post. All while the memory of the humiliation in that conference room pulsed. It reminded her daily, never again. But instead of bitterness, it fueled clarity, preparation, and transformation. By the end of chapter 3, Emily stood at her desk, gun sight ready for the next set of challenges. Unseen, yet in motion. A force converging in the silence. It started as just another Monday. Emily Parker walked through the glass doors of Harrington & Co. in downtown Chicago at precisely 7:58 a.m., her ID badge already clipped to her blouse, her laptop bag slung over one shoulder. The lobby smelled faintly of lemon-scented floor polish and ambition. She had grown used to the rhythm of this building, the elevator chimes, the quiet good mornings, the feeling of being present without being fully seen. But this morning felt different, even before she opened her inbox. She hadn't slept well the night before. The memory of the all-staff meeting still crept into her thoughts like a shadow that refused to fade. The laughter, the résumé on the projector, the slight tremble in her fingers afterward as she packed her things. But now, 3 weeks later, something had shifted. The tremble had transformed into resolve. Her plan was no longer just in her head. It was real, measured in calendar blocks, feedback loops, and increasingly visible footprints in Slack threads and shared project files. She was starting to be noticed. Quietly, strategically, like a chess move made 5 turns ago, finally beginning to show its power. Emily opened her laptop, unlocked the screen, and began her morning routine. Check her project board, scan overnight emails, update the opportunities tracker she'd built in Notion. She glanced at the green highlighted row labeled Google PM role and smiled. Her second interview, a case study round, had gone well the previous week. She had walked out feeling like, for the first time, her ideas had been heard on their own merit. No filters, no edits. At 10:03 a.m., just as she was stirring her second cup of coffee in the office kitchen, she felt her phone buzz. One notification. Subject: Next steps, Google PM interview. Her breath caught. She blinked at the screen. It was from Diane, the recruiter she had met in her first video call. "Hi, Emily. Hope you're doing well. We'd love to move you forward to on-site interviews. Are you available next Tuesday afternoon?" Emily's fingers froze around the ceramic mug. For a few seconds, the office around her vanished. The clinking of spoons, the hum of the fridge, the faint conversation from down the hall, all muted. She felt the now familiar rush. Not panic, not fear, but a clarity that sharpened every nerve ending in her body. She sat down slowly at the small bar near the window, opened her email, and read the message again, this time aloud in a whisper. On-site interviews. The real thing. 5 back-to-back rounds with product leads, UX designers, and engineering managers. This wasn't prep anymore. This was it. Her response was measured, professional, but her hands were shaking as she typed. "Hi, Diane. Thank you so much for the update. I'd be honored to continue. Tuesday afternoon works perfectly. Please let me know the schedule and prep materials." She hit send. Then she sat back in her chair and stared out the window. The clouds were low over the river, streaked with silver, and something inside her began to rise. That afternoon, she stayed late at the office, not because she had to, but because her momentum had reached a kind of hum. She opened her prep folder, reviewed her notes on product frameworks, user journey maps, and behavioral questions. She updated her elevator pitch. She even timed herself answering, "Tell me about a time you overcame a major setback," and wrote a version that didn't make her voice crack when she mentioned the day her resume was laughed at. At 9:47 p.m., after a shower and a bowl of Costa she barely touched, she opened her laptop one more time. Her apartment was quiet, the only sound the gentle hum of the city outside her window. And then came the second ping. A new calendar invite. Google PM on-site interview. Tuesday, 1 p.m. CST. The schedule was clear. Product sense, 45 minutes. Analytical thinking, 45 minutes. System design, 45 minutes. Behavioral interview, 45 minutes. Lunch chat with a PM, informal. She stared at it, eyes wide. The final test. She stood up, walked to her window, and pressed her palm against the glass. The lights of downtown Chicago sparkled back at her. Somewhere, someone else had just received the same invite. Somewhere, someone else was rehearsing their pitch, refining their answers, dreaming of the same thing. But none of them had her reason. None of them had been laughed at by a room full of colleagues and had turned that into a strategy. None of them had marked the exact moment they were publicly diminished and built a career out of proving that moment wrong. She whispered to herself, "This is mine." And then, for the first time in months, she closed her laptop with something close to peace. Tuesday arrived dressed in gray skies and quiet tension. Emily Parker woke at 5:30 a.m. in her Lakeview apartment, not from her alarm, but from sheer anticipation. The on-site Google interview, 5 rounds in a single afternoon, sat in her calendar like a quiet detonation. Her outfit was already prepared: tailored navy blazer, crisp white blouse, understated gold studs, and low black heels. She wanted to look like clarity, not performance. By 6 a.m., she had brewed coffee, reviewed her notes, and read through the deck she had built specifically for today. Her impact matrix, leadership moments, and a few case studies visualized as if she were already inside the company. She whispered her answers into the still morning air. How do you approach a product with no data? Tell me about a time you challenged leadership. What's your favorite Google product and how would you improve it? Every question was a portal into her story. By 11:30 a.m., Emily stood at the entrance of Google's downtown Chicago office. Glass walls, neutral tones, a quiet buzz of genius in motion. A polite receptionist handed her a badge. "You'll be in room 3B, she said with a warm smile. "They're expecting you." As Emily rode the elevator alone, she caught her reflection in the mirrored doors. It wasn't the same woman from a month ago, the one who had shrunk inside a conference room, stared at her own resume projected like a joke. No, this was the woman who built something from that silence. At 12:58 p.m., she clicked Join on the screen in room 3B. The recruiter appeared. "Hi, Emily. Welcome again. We're excited to have you." The day began. Round 1. Product Sense. A senior PM appeared on screen, friendly but focused. "Let's say we want to improve Google Calendar for remote teams. Where do you start?" Emily took a breath. "First, I'd clarify who we're building for, remote managers or hybrid workers. I'd map their pain points, scheduling across time zones, managing context switches, and balancing focus time." The ideas poured out, structured and sharp. She spoke of segmenting user types, creating MVPs to test asynchronous meeting reminders, and integrating focus insights with existing Gmail habits. The interviewer smiled. "Strong framework, and you pivoted well when I introduced a constraint. Thank you, Emily." Round 2. Analytics. A different face, this time numbers. You've launched a new search feature. Retention is down. What do you look at? Emily's fingers danced across her mental dashboard. I'd check feature adoption rates, time to value, drop off by action. I'd segment by user type and traffic source, see if retention issues are behavioral or systemic. They dove deep into metrics, cohort analysis, A/B testing, activation funnels. You've clearly worked with live data before, the interviewer noted. Emily smiled softly. Yes, I've also worked with silence. Data speaks, you just have to learn how to listen. Round 3, system design. This was the one she feared. A calm technical lead appeared. Let's design a notification system for Gmail that respects time zones and delivery preferences. Emily stood to draw on the whiteboard. She outlined components: request layer, preference logic, delay queue, redundancy fallback, failure alerts. Nice. What's your scaling strategy? I'd introduce message batching and regional caching for low latency dispatches. Also, customizable quiet hours synced to calendar events. The engineer's eyebrow rose. You've done your homework. No, she said, smiling for the first time. I've lived it. Round 4, behavioral. A woman in a red blouse appeared, warm but probing. Emily, tell me about a time your leadership wasn't recognized. And there it was. The room blurred for a moment. Emily looked down, then up. 3 weeks ago, my resume was projected in front of 70 coworkers. My boss made a joke about my career path. The room laughed. I went home and rebuilt everything. I rewrote my profiles, refined my thinking, practiced every day. 2 weeks later, I presented a revised strategy he now uses. I didn't correct him. I just let the work speak. A pause. Then the woman said, gently, "That's what we call quiet power." Round 5, the product manager lunch. It was casual, salad bowls and sparkling water. The product manager asked, "What motivates you, really?" Emily answered without hesitation, "Being underestimated, and proving that silent people can carry sharp strategies, that doing things with heart doesn't mean lacking edge." They talked about values, empathy, power structures in male-dominated rooms, and the art of building products that protect, not just impress. The product manager asked, "Why Google?" "Because I want to build with people who believe product isn't just code, it's character." When the 5 interviews ended, Emily walked down the hallway with no fanfare, just the quiet rhythm of her shoes against the floor. No one clapped, no one cheered. But inside her, something was roaring. She passed through the revolving doors of the building. Outside, Chicago was golden with evening light. She took a deep breath, pulled her coat tighter, and walked toward the train. That night, at 11:47 p.m., while sipping chamomile tea, her phone vibrated. One new message from Diane. "Hey, Emily, just wanted to say everyone really enjoyed speaking with you today. We'll follow up formally soon. But just know, your story stuck with all of us." Emily stared at the screen. The light from her desk lamp cast a soft circle across the room. She leaned back, closed her eyes, and whispered, "This time, they heard me." The day after her Google on-site interviews, Emily Parker returned to the office wearing the same blazer from the day before. Not because she hadn't changed, but because she had changed so profoundly that she no longer cared about small illusions. She walked through the doors of Harrington & Co. with a stillness that bordered on eerie. No rush, no nerves, just presence. No one knew yet, not about the interviews, not about how well she'd done, not about the email that had arrived at 2:07 a.m., short, cryptic, and clear. "Emily, our team is moving your application to the final hiring review panel. Stay tuned." It wasn't an offer, but it was more than hope. It was evidence. And for Emily, that was everything. She sat at her desk like any other morning, opened Slack, checked emails, gave her usual quiet nods to the team. But inside, she moved differently. She replied to messages like someone who wasn't fighting for validation anymore, someone who had already been chosen and now had nothing to prove. At 9:32 a.m., Mark walked by her desk and paused. "Emily, quick note. I sent over the Denver deck with your revisions. Really clean work. You'll co-present with me next week." She looked up. "Of course. Thanks, Mark." No sparkle in her eyes, just calm. Let him feel the absence of desperation, she thought. Let him see how still success can look. That week, Emily operated in two worlds. By day, she was still the diligent team player, polishing decks, reviewing budgets, mentoring Karen through a difficult client call. She stayed late when asked, offered insights when no one expected them, and kept the Denver pitch tracking smoothly. But by night, she was already elsewhere. She set up mock negotiations with a mentor in Seattle. She reread the Google Code of Conduct, just in case. She downloaded the onboarding docs friends had shared. She wrote a resignation letter she hadn't yet sent. Clean, warm, confident. And she watched YouTube videos of other PMs reflecting on their first 90 days at Google. Not because she needed guidance, but because she was preparing to belong. It felt surreal, like watching herself in two realities at once. One version, sitting quietly in a meeting while Mark reviewed quarterly goals. The other, rehearsing answers to, how would you prioritize features with conflicting stakeholder needs? On Wednesday evening, after most of the office had cleared out, she stayed late in the quiet hub room. She wasn't working on anything assigned. She was building a personal doc, the bridge strategy. It mapped her final 3 weeks at Harrington, assuming an offer came, with 3 phases. Week 1, strengthen handovers. Train Rachel on client lead tools. Clean up documentation. Week 2, deliver final presentations with composure. Ensure 0 gaps. Make them miss her without knowing why. Week 3, resign with dignity. No speech, no drama, just a folder full of excellence and a locked drawer left clean. As she saved the file, she whispered to herself, "This is how quiet exits are made. Not with fireworks, with precision." By Thursday, whispers had started. "Emily's been different lately, right? She seems ahead of things. I heard she helped design half of Carlos's metric sheet. She's on every thread before it goes live." Mark called her in for a one-on-one, he said. "You've been unusually sharp this week. Feels like you've hit another level." Emily smiled. "I'm just focused." He narrowed his eyes. "Focused or planning something?" She held his gaze. "What would you think if I was?" He chuckled. "I'd say just don't surprise me too much." She nodded, stood up, and left. But he was already too late. The surprise wasn't coming. It had already happened. On Friday morning, at exactly 7:17 a.m., Emily received the subject line that made her pause mid-sip of coffee. "Your Google offer letter is ready." She stared at it. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she stood up to the window of her apartment and let the Chicago skyline speak back to her. 3 weeks ago, they laughed at her resume. Now, Google was putting a dollar value on her strategy, her silence, her poise. She opened the email. The details were even better than expected. Base salary, bonus structure, equity package, relocation support if needed, and a personal note from the VP she had lunched with. "We showed you more than talent. We showed you who builds quietly and leads without applause. We need more of that here." She read it twice, and then she did something she hadn't done in years. She allowed herself to cry. Not from sadness, not even from vindication, but from the soft, gentle release of finally being seen, not through a projection, not through someone else's filter, but as herself. She wiped her eyes, printed the offer, and folded it carefully into an envelope. The next day, she would carry it in her bag to work. Not to share, not yet, but to remind herself the secret round was over, and she had won. Friday morning arrived wrapped in quiet power. Emily Parker stood in front of her mirror in her Lakeview apartment, fastening the second button of her dark emerald blouse. There was nothing extravagant about her look. Understated earrings, soft waves in her hair, tailored pants. But everything about her was intentional, from the curve of her shoulders to the way she slipped the crisp, white envelope into her laptop bag, neatly marked, Google offer, final. She didn't plan on using it today. Not unless the moment asked for it. Not unless silence stopped being enough. She walked into Harrington & Co. at 8:04 a.m. sharp. The city was waking up slow under a silver sky, and the office lights hummed with Friday fatigue. She passed through the glass doors like a shadow, nodding at Judy from facilities, who smiled and said, "Morning, Em." Her fingers tapped rhythmically on her phone. Not nerves, control. She had already accepted the offer digitally the night before. Her start date at Google was set, July 1st. Her final working day at Harrington would be June 17th. 2 weeks to close every loop, 2 weeks to leave without a whisper out of place. But today, there was still a presentation. At 11 a.m., Emily was scheduled to co-lead a strategy pitch to a regional client. One that, ironically, Mark had once refused to let her even sit in on. Now, she was not only leading the deck creation, but also delivering half of it. The evolution had happened too subtly for most people to notice. Except for him. At 9:42 a.m., Mark walked over to her desk holding a printout. "Quick note," he said, tapping the top corner of the deck she'd built. "Slide 7. Change efficiency boost to value unlock. Feel stronger." She glanced at it. "Sure," she said, then added, "I already updated slide 10 with the revised budget forecast. The model was off by 3%. He blinked. "You caught that?" She nodded. He hesitated, then asked, "Emily, anything you want to talk about today? You've been moving a little differently lately." She smiled. Not wide, just enough. "Maybe." That was all she said. The meeting room filled slowly. Executive chairs, glass walls, the kind of space that had once made her feel like an outsider sneaking in. Now she walked in first, took the seat nearest the screen, opened the deck. Her fingers didn't shake. Mark began the opening, set the tone, thanked the client for their time, then handed it off to her. Emily stood, voice clear, posture upright. She delivered her portion with precision. Trends, projections, actionables. Her pacing was flawless, her tone natural. No script, just fluency. The client nodded throughout. They asked 3 questions. She answered before Mark had a chance to step in. At the end, the client said, "That was one of the most concise recommendations we've had this quarter." Emily simply smiled and sat down. After the room cleared, Mark turned to her. "That was sharp. You've definitely grown." She looked him in the eyes and replied, "No, I've always been sharp. You just never looked." The silence between them was electric. She reached into her bag slowly, took out the envelope, not to hand it over, not yet, just to place it softly on the desk between them. He looked down, read the text. Google, final. He blinked. Once, twice. "You're leaving?" She nodded. "In 2 weeks, I'll send formal notice Monday." He leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply. "I guess congratulations are in order." She didn't gloat, didn't smirk. She just said, "I worked hard for this, silently, but not invisibly." He rubbed the back of his neck. We should have let you lead earlier." Emily stood up, gathering her things. "You should have looked earlier. I've been ready for years." As she walked out of the room, envelope in hand, she felt something unshakable settle into her chest. Not pride, not revenge, but arrival. Back at her desk, Rachel walked by and asked, "Everything okay?" Emily nodded, slid the envelope into her drawer, and smiled. Everything's exactly where it should be. Monday morning didn't feel like an ending. It felt like choreography. Emily Parker arrived at Harrington & Co. 5 minutes earlier than usual, carrying the same laptop bag that had held her folded Google offer letter all weekend. She wore a soft gray blazer over a pale lavender blouse, not flashy, not subdued, just deliberate. Everything she wore that day was a message. I no longer need your approval. I have my own authority now. At 8:31 a.m., she sat at her desk and opened her email. The subject line she had drafted late Sunday night waited in drafts, untouched but ready. She reread it once. Subject: Formal Notice of Resignation. To Mark Stevenson, CC, HR, Team Ops. It was crisp, respectful, clear. 2 weeks. Available for full handover. Grateful for the growth, the lessons, even the challenges, especially the challenges. She didn't send it. Not yet. At 9 a.m., Mark called for a full staff meeting. This quarter's numbers came in stronger than expected, he announced in the main conference room, now filled with 60 staffers in swivel chairs, lukewarm coffee cups in hand. And we're planning a new leadership structure to support the next growth phase. Emily stood at the back, arms crossed loosely, expression unreadable. She knew what was coming. The promotion parade, the positioning game, the moment where visibility mattered more than contribution. Mark smiled, looked around, and said, "Before we go into the team realignments, I want to thank a few people. Carlos for the new internal dashboard, Rachel for cross-department integration, and..." He paused. Then his eyes settled on Emily. "And Emily Parker, for your recent work on the Denver proposal and the Anderson pitch. You've really stepped up." The room clapped politely. Some turned to glance at her, surprised. She nodded, once, calmly, but she didn't smile. Mark looked like he was about to continue, but Emily took a step forward. "I'd like to say something," she said. The room stilled. Mark blinked. "Of course." She stepped to the front of the room, heels silent against the floor. She stood beside the screen. No slides, no clicker, just her. "I want to thank the team for everything I've learned here," she said. "Some of it was in metrics and decks, some of it in feedback, but most of it, the part that changed me, was in silence." People shifted in their seats. "I learned what it means to be invisible in plain sight. To have ideas used but names forgotten. To watch someone else get applause for something I built quietly. And I learned how to turn that silence into something stronger." She paused. "And that's why, today, I'm submitting my formal resignation. In 2 weeks, I'll be joining Google as a product manager." Silence. Complete. Not shock. Awe. Mark's jaw tightened. He glanced at her, then at the team. Rachel's eyes widened. Carlos froze. Emily continued. "This isn't about revenge. This is about recognition. Of myself, first, and of what happens when someone chooses not to beg for visibility, but to create her own." She stepped back, handed Mark a printed copy of her letter. The room didn't clap. Not yet. But the silence wasn't awkward. It was reverent. As she walked back to her desk, someone whispered, "She really did it." Another said, "Wait, she was interviewing this whole time?" At 10:15, back in the coffee corner, Judy handed her a cappuccino and simply said, "You made this place better, Em," quietly. "Thank you." Emily smiled. "No problem, but I won't be quiet much longer." At 10:42 a.m., Mark sent a company-wide message. "Join me in congratulating Emily Parker on her next chapter. Her work here has been exceptional. We're lucky to have had her." The tone was polished, professional, but everyone in that office knew he hadn't just lost an employee. He'd lost a mirror, one that reflected everything he failed to recognize in time. By Tuesday morning, the air in the office had changed. Not just for Emily, for everyone. Whispers rippled through Slack channels. She got into Google? Did you know she was applying? Did you hear what she said in the meeting? People who hadn't made eye contact with her in months were now nodding in the hallway. Some were even stopping by her desk under the pretext of asking about a file or a workflow, but what they really wanted was to be near the gravity she now carried. Emily noticed, but she didn't gloat. She moved like weather, steady, inevitable, unbothered. She spent the next days doing what she did best, quietly setting things in order. She organized every project folder, labeled every handover document, recorded short Loom videos explaining key processes. She answered questions before people even asked. She met with Rachel privately and said, "You're ready to take over, Anderson. Don't let anyone question that." Rachel had tears in her eyes when she replied, "I won't, because you showed me how." But Emily knew there was still one moment left, one space she hadn't claimed, one stage she hadn't rewritten. The next leadership sync was Thursday at 3 p.m., the same kind of meeting where, just a month ago, her resume had been projected as a joke. The same chairs, the same lighting, the same cower dynamic. She wasn't invited to this one, but she asked to attend. Mark hesitated, then said yes. The room was small, 10 directors and senior consultants, Mark at the head, speaking in measured tones about Q3 forecasting and pipeline movement. Emily entered 5 minutes early and sat quietly near the end of the table. Her notebook was closed, her phone was face down, her bag rested at her feet, and inside, the envelope. Mark glanced at her halfway through the meeting, as if to say, "Why are you here?" She met his eyes, but gave him nothing. Then, near the end, he opened the floor. "Any last points before we wrap?" Emily stood. She reached down and pulled the envelope from her bag. It was the same one she'd carried for nearly a week, clean, uncreased, heavy with meaning. She walked calmly to the front of the room, placed the envelope on the table, and looked at Mark. "I believe this belongs here." He stared at it, slowly lifted the flap. Inside was a printed copy of her Google offer, not just the summary, the full letter with title, salary, and signing details. He looked up, eyes flicking from the paper to her. She continued, "3 weeks ago, I was humiliated in this room. Not with a raised voice, not with insults, with silence, with the kind of dismissal that tells you you're not meant to be anything more than a background slide." The room went still. I wanted this moment not because I need to prove anything, but because this is what acknowledgement looks like. Not applause, just presence. She turned to the others. "I'll be gone in 7 days. You won't remember the decks I built, but you might remember this. Never underestimate someone just because they don't interrupt you." She looked back at Mark. "I never raised my voice. I never had to. I just left." And then she walked out. No one followed her. No one clapped. But the silence she left behind echoed louder than anything she could have said. Her final day at Harrington & Co. began like the others, intentionally quiet. Emily Parker arrived just before 8 a.m., as she always had. Same routine, same desk, same neutral smile to the front receptionist. But everything was different. This was not a beginning. This was an exit, not of desperation, but of design. Her desk was already cleared, drawers empty, cables coiled neatly into a tote bag. She had spent the entire week preparing every file, note, and process with surgical precision. There would be no chaos after her, no confusion, only clarity. She wore a navy dress that matched the sky outside, simple, structured, powerful. Not to impress anyone, but to mark a moment she knew she'd remember forever. By 9:15 a.m., the floor was buzzing. A few curious glances, several quiet goodbyes. Even Judy from facilities brought her a last coffee, almond milk, no sugar, and simply said, "They'll miss you more than they know." Emily smiled. "I know." At 10 a.m., she sent one final email to her department. Subject: Thank you. Team: Today marks my last day at Harrington. I'm incredibly grateful for the lessons, the challenges, and the growth this space has given me. I've learned more in silence than most do in noise. I'll be joining Google as a product manager next month. If I've ever worked with you, I hope I've made your load lighter. If we didn't connect yet, I hope my presence still made an impact. My files are documented, handoffs are done, but more importantly, I leave with no bitterness, only clarity. Thank you for the space and for the silence. It taught me everything. Warmly, Emily Parker. By 10:17 a.m., the floor was frozen. People looked at one another, eyes wide, emails open. She's gone today? She's gone to Google? Wait, she wrote all those case decks? Did you see how she handled that Denver transition? Mark hadn't responded. Not yet. At 10:45 a.m., she picked up her bag and stood. Carlos walked over, hesitant. Hey, I just wanted to say, I didn't know back then what happened. I was just doing the slide, but looking back. She placed a hand gently on his arm. It's okay. You don't owe me an apology. Just remember next time, who built the deck? He nodded. As she made her way down the hallway, past the meeting rooms she once stood outside of, eyes followed her. Not with judgment, with recognition. People stood. Rachel mouthed, "Thank you." Karen clapped, once, softly, then stopped. And then came Mark. He stepped out of his glass-walled office, arms crossed. Their eyes met. He opened his mouth. Emily. She didn't stop walking. She passed him with a calm that pierced deeper than any speech. And just before the elevator doors opened, she turned. "For what it's worth," she said, voice level, "I hope you do better with the next Emily." The elevator chimed. She stepped inside, and just before the doors closed, she saw it. Not regret, not anger, not guilt, but realization. That was enough. Outside, the summer air of Chicago welcomed her like a sigh. Light breeze, clean sky. The world, finally, hers again. She walked 3 blocks without checking her phone, then pulled it out, opened her calendar, and tapped the next meeting. Orientation, Google PM team, Monday, 9 a.m. Emily smiled, not because it was over, but because she had started something no room could ever silence again.